Canada becoming a natural resource global powerhouse is a big talking point on the federal election trail.
Premier David Eby is defending the government's approval of a new pipeline project that will supply natural gas to a proposed floating LNG terminal just north of Prince Rupert.
The supply to get to 12 to 15, we have the engineering know-how, and the demand is there. One of the things that's brought this opportunity back around for Canada.
A massive 14 million tons of LNG, worth 40 billion Canadian dollars, has officially set sail from Kitimat Port, heading directly to North Asia without relying on a single segment of U.S. pipeline infrastructure. This marks Canada's inaugural direct LNG export and delivers a bold strike to Washington's energy dominance. That same evening, Prime Minister Mark Carney sent a message to his cabinet, declaring the East-West pipeline a national priority. The momentum is building, and there's no reversing course now. The White House was caught off guard, as 97% of Canada's oil and gas continues to flow south. Yet Carney has just turned the first lever to redirect that revenue stream. If Ottawa decides to close the northern supply line, who will cover America's energy costs? And what challenges does the U.S. face in this shift? Across more than half the globe, the gas law Glasgow, departing from Kitimat, reached South Korea in just 10 days. A stark contrast to the nearly 20-day journey U.S. LNG tankers face through the Panama Canal. Each nautical mile saved translates to U.S. tariffs, dissolving the moment the cargo is offloaded. However, Ottawa's LNG strategy isn't solely about a shorter route. Asia, the target market, is projected to account for 60% of global LNG imports in 2025. This means that for every 3 LNG shipments arriving in Tokyo, Shanghai, or Seoul, nearly 2 will originate from the Pacific's far side. Canada, previously a secondary conduit for Houston, has now positioned itself as a rapid response energy hub at Northeast Asia's doorstep. The foundation of this ambition is the 40 billion Canadian dollar LNG Canada project, the largest private investment in the nation's history. On June 30th, the first commercial shipment, totaling 14 million tons annually, was loaded and embarked across the Pacific, signifying Canada's first direct LNG export without depending on U.S. pipelines. A consortium including Shell, Petronas, PetroChina, Mitsubishi, and Kogas constructed the 670 kilometers coastal gasoline pipeline to transport Montney gas to Tidewater, bypassing Washington entirely. Train 1, with a capacity of 6.5 million tons, is now operational, and Train 2, set to launch next year, will increase capacity to 14 million tons, with plans to double that once expansion is greenlit. Despite technical challenges capping output at 0.4 billion cubic feet per day, Reuters analysts predict the facility will hit its full 1 billion cubic feet per day capacity before the fourth quarter, unleashing more gas just as storage reaches its limit. With every shipment, Canadian gas undercuts Henry Hub prices, and Trump's tariff threats lose their edge. In essence, the LNG strategy empowers Prime Minister Carney to control the supply flow with unmatched political precision. Asia's energy demand is surging. Canada has the shipments ready, and the U.S. now risks lining up to purchase gas from its neighbor to keep California's lights on. With every tariff threat tweet, the market shrugs as fuel prices now answer to Latitude 54, not White House rhetoric. Any retaliatory tariff plan hinges on the same LNG waves leaving Kitimat, where the Pacific Gateway remains open and unlikely to shut. Prime Minister Mark Carney recently told the Calgary Herald that a new pipeline from Alberta to the Pacific coast is highly likely to be classified as a national essential project, cutting approval times from years to months. This isn't mere talk. Canada's Parliament passed the One Canadian Economy Act, establishing a streamlined process to expedite critical energy and infrastructure projects and eliminate interprovincial trade barriers, ensuring the pipeline's progress. Once completed, this pipeline will transport crude directly from Alberta's oil fields to Vancouver's port, bypassing U.S. Midwest and East Coast refineries, which currently process about 3.75 million barrels per day of Canadian crude, per April 2025 EIA data. Picture the consequences. storage tanks in Chicago, Detroit, or Philadelphia, long relying on Alberta oil, would dry up, forcing Washington to import that oil back from Canada by sea, facing higher shipping and marine insurance costs far exceeding pipeline rates. Ottawa has taken lessons from the Trans Mountain expansion challenges, where prolonged legal battles with Indigenous communities nearly halted the project. This time, the Carney government has preemptively secured benefit agreements with Indigenous groups, committed to respecting land rights, and allocated funds for community development, reducing legal risks before construction begins. This build and reconcile approach has effectively neutralized objections at the planning stage, ensuring the pipeline's progress. Upon completion, Vancouver will emerge as North America's leading oil export hub, while the Gulf Coast and Mexico's pipeline network will be relegated to a secondary role. EIA data indicates Canada set a record by exporting 4.3 million barrels per day to the U.S. in July 2024, following the Trans Mountain expansion. Now, with a new pipeline, every barrel of Alberta crude can be loaded on a tankers off British Columbia's coast and shipped to Asia or Latin America, entirely bypassing U.S. refineries. So what about Trump's tariff threats? Imposing 25% duties on Canadian oil and gas may seem intimidating, but once Canada's supply finds new markets, those threats become empty. Each time Carney announces project milestones, Western Canada select crude prices drop to retain U.S. buyers, simultaneously releasing more oil and neutralizing tariff threats. In today's tense geopolitical landscape, Carney's Trans-Country Pipeline serves as both a preemptive move against U.S. strategic interests and a testament to Canada's bold energy vision. Free trade, diverse markets, and a firm assurance that its taps cannot be turned off. Once the Alberta-Vancouver pipeline is operational, Washington's tariff maneuvers will lose their weight as Canada secures a direct route to the ocean beyond any blockade. The U.S. produces nearly 13.4 million barrels of crude oil daily, but this tells only half the story. Domestic pipelines meant to transport that supply are stalled by years-long environmental lawsuits. Projects like Keystone XL, Mountain Valley, and Constitution, despite Trump's support, face legal obstacles preventing them from delivering oil to refineries. Now, consider this scenario. When Canada redirects its supply to the Pacific via its new pipeline, refineries in Chicago and Philadelphia, which rely on 3.4 million barrels of Canadian crude daily, would need to switch to heavier, costlier Middle Eastern grades, carrying a spot market premium above $3 per barrel. This cost increase would raise domestic gasoline production expenses, potentially driving retail gas prices in Midwest states sharply higher, despite the EIA's forecast of $3.10 per gallon in Q3 2025. In this context, Trump's threats of 35% tariffs on all Canadian imports, including energy, might seem like a decisive blow against Ottawa. Yet, the opposite is true. LNG prices now follow their own course, independent of White House tweets. Trump's repeated 25 to 35% tariff threats have become mere social media noise, as every tanker leaving Kitimat ignores USMCA priorities. Trump even threatened a 200% tariff on pharmaceuticals imported from Europe and Canada to pressure Big Pharma to return to the U.S. However, when Canada halts direct energy exports, its pipelines and LNG shipments become powerful leverage. Instead of retreating, Washington is scrambling to maintain access to Alberta's affordable oil and gas. The dual threat is evident. The U.S. risks losing its low-cost oil source, facing pricier Middle Eastern crude and higher shipping costs, while its LNG export competitiveness weakens as Canada's Asia supply chain cuts transit time from 20 days to 10, undermining U.S. market share in Northeast Asia. As long as U.S. pipelines remain bogged down by lawsuits and tariff threats, stay confined to social media, Canada will continue to exploit this shift, moving away from being the Gulf Coast supplier and forcing Washington to follow its lead. Tariff or embargo plans thus become irrelevant. U.S. average gasoline prices have already peaked at $3.13 per gallon this summer amid rising demand. If Canadian supply shifts to the Pacific, Midwest refineries, which source 66.1% of their crude from Canada daily, would need to import costlier Middle Eastern oil. This would increase refining costs, pushing pump prices up by approximately 30 cents per gallon, a nearly 10% rise from current levels. Contrary to promises of affordable fuel, Americans in states like Illinois, Michigan, and Ohio would feel the financial strain. Filling a 20-gallon tank could cost an extra $5 to $8, while household budgets would face added pressure from rising shipping costs for essentials like food and clothing. Suburban and rural families, relying on cars for daily tasks, might cut non-essential trips, and trucking firms would pass higher fuel costs on to consumers. When tariffs are merely a bluff, American consumers bear the real impact of supply constraints, affecting not just gas prices but daily routines. Prime Minister Carney's choice of August 1st as the negotiation deadline is strategic, long enough for the Alberta-Vancouver pipeline to become unstoppable, yet short enough to keep the White House guessing Ottawa's next steps. Once the final pipeline segments are welded under British Columbia's mountains, Washington's tariff threats or political pressure will be like water slipping through fingers. But the story continues. If Canada opens another LNG terminal at Prince Rupert, its far northwest port, transit times to Asia could drop to just 8 days, 3 times faster than U.S. LNG ports in Louisiana or Texas. In that case, North America transforms from a tariff battleground into the heart of a global energy supply chain race. From this angle, every tweet threatening 25 to 100% duties is a missed shot. Washington races to build domestic pipelines, but remains hindered by environmental lawsuits and indigenous protests, while Ottawa has seized the advantage, partnering with Shell, Petronas, and Mitsubishi to redirect energy capital at will. So, how will the White House secure its affordable oil supply? Will it ease tariffs to maintain the flow? Or will it push duties to 100% and brace for higher gas prices? What will American families face next? Share your thoughts in the comments on the smartest strategy in this high-stakes energy and tariff showdown, reshaping transatlantic power dynamics.